So he doesn't understand you? And she just doesn't get it? Brain sex. Learn how to communicate effectively. Next on Living Smart. Hello, I'm Patricia Gross. Welcome to Living Smart. This is a new series about getting the most out of life. Today's guest is a Renaissance woman, Nan Linke. She'll share some hot tips for being heard, how to resolve conflicts quickly, and improve communication between men and women. So have pen and paper ready. We'll be giving out resource information at the end of the program.
I spent the first 35 years of my life thinking, feeling, and observing. Quiet. And really, other than finding out what people want and telling them what it's going to cost, you don't have to talk when you're landscaping. It's a moving meditation for me.
Nan Linke enjoys spending time in the garden she herself landscaped. As with nature, death and renewal is something she can relate to. She reinvents herself often, following her soul's path by doing what she wants, even if that means going against her own introverted nature. Today, her passions have become her occupations. She's a master landscaper, an astrologer, and, for most, a family therapist.
I found a profession, I was going to have to talk. And I was going to have to learn how to talk in a way that would make a difference in people's lives quickly. And so I started studying all of the psycholinguistic skills and hypnosis and designed some systems of communication that I teach.
In all three professions, she's had to do a bit of talking, something she didn't enjoy doing while growing up.
I had an alcoholic family. So, the word in alcoholic family is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. So I just didn't find that my communication was welcomed, and so I just kept quiet.
Keeping quiet, she learned to go to school, excel in academics, and listen.
I always loved school. It's the only place people didn't tell me I was crazy, and they didn't want to hear what I had to say. I learned to listen very intently at what people were saying because I noticed that what they said was often not what they did. What I find is that communication is about verbal and nonverbal. It's about what you hear and what you don't hear. It's what you feel. It's what you sense.
Nan is an eternal student. After a bachelor's degree in international studies, she became interested in astrology.
I went to this lady, and she knew me better than, at that point, the psychoanalyst I'd had for 2 years, and I'd just given her my date, place, and time of birth. So I thought, I need to study this because this would be a good tool.
She opened her astrology practice in 1971, began to read every book she could on the subject, and eventually got a publicist to promote her practice.
I could tell people things, and I could give them insight, but I didn't know anything about problem solving or really could answer their questions.
That's when she decided to get a master's degree in marriage and family counseling at the University of Houston, Clear Lake.
It was kind of a complement to astrology because family therapy was kind of the edgy part of psychology in the 70s because it had been founded by hypnotists and people that really saw the whole system as one.
Throughout her life, Nan immersed herself in books to understand herself and those around her. But suffering played a major role in her ability to help others.
When I was 18 and moved to North Africa, I was attacked by a pack of wild dogs, and my left leg was torn pretty much to pieces. So that was certainly a cause for reflection. In 1968, when I was in that bicycle accident, and then when I moved back to Texas, when I got married, I married a man who became a drug addict and bankrupted us, and the IRS took my house.
Nan says she's also survived 22 car wrecks, which taught her the relationship between mind and body and how to heal herself.
I have made a decision early in my life to become an optimist. I totally believe in the grace of God. I believe that I'm very spiritually obedient, and I always look for the lesson in things, and I know that as a door closes, another one opens. I also believe that the Buddhists probably got it right, that we get equal blessings and equal sorrow. And I have had blessings equal to and in surpassing of my traumas.
She counts as her greatest blessings her family, especially her twin granddaughters.
I've created a healthy, happy, functioning family after not coming from one. I think my greatest failure, I don't really know what that would be, because as an optimist, I don't even believe in failure. There you go.
Nan Linke, thank you for joining us on Living Smart.
Thank you for having me.
You have a particular definition for communication. Could you give us your definition so I can get your perspective on it?
Communication involves what is said, what is not said, what is felt, what is not felt, and it has to do with speaking, listening, and understanding. So it's really a three-part experience.
And you have a tape called Communication as a Power Tool. Share some of those tools with us.
Well, first of all, this came about because my students and my clients said, we want to learn to talk like you do, because we know you didn't start out that way. So for about a year, I thought, how am I going to teach this? And in thinking about how communication works best, I came up with the system I use, which is that all important communications should be rehearsed. You should probably have 24 hours to think about it and make an appointment to talk to the other person, and all of your statements should be in 3 sentences. Because if it's more than that, particularly if it's a sensitive subject, the person is going to quit listening after about 3 sentences.
Give me an example of a sentence that you would use.
Well, if someone did something I didn't like, I might say, first of all, Patty, I'd like your permission to discuss something that's important to me, and it'll only take about 10 minutes. When in the next 24 hours is it convenient? Then you would look at your schedule, we'd come to an agreement. And I might say, Patty, something has happened that has really made me upset, and if it ever happens again, there will be an outcome, and this is what it might be. And what is your response to that? And if we knew a specific thing, then we would add details to that. But we would just make a 3-sentence. And always we talk in an I message rather than a you message, because when you talk in the you message, I call that the crooked finger, because we're really talking about ourselves. It's called projection or disowning something. And I know when I was in graduate school with the great, fabulous professors I had, they said that when somebody wants to give you a you message and you can't stop them, that you're supposed to sit down with a pencil and paper and say, wait a minute, this is really important. I want to get this down. And while you're writing, you realize they've given you a weather report about their interstate. Now, it's very centering to do this, but it's also really helps you to develop the distance you need when someone is upset. Because if we don't get into our neutral, we will not be able to communicate.
Now, you said you message and I message. You mean you did such and such,
right.
You said such and such.
You never, right. I feel
take responsibility, I feel.
It's really about my feelings, not about your behavior, because I can't change your behavior. I can only communicate to you about my reaction to it. So you don't ever say to somebody, you made me this. That's the victim statement.
Right.
Or you did this and you this. It's really all about, I'd like to talk to you about something I experienced in interaction with you or in communication with you that I think is a problem for me, and I'd like to talk about it with you.
And the most important thing to start a communication effectively is to ask permission. Why
Absolutely.
Is that? Why?
Because we all have personal space and personal boundaries. That's been well documented. And if you don't ask permission, you're essentially attacking someone. And so you're going to always get a defensive response, even if you're right.
Right.
So if you ask someone's permission, you get them into agreement or what we call rapport. They may go out of rapport after they hear what you have to say, but at least initially they're listening. And the biggest problem I think we have in communication is not people being able or unable to speak, but unable to be heard or understood.
Interesting. Why do you think we're having, as a society, so many problems in communicating effectively?
I think it's probably twofold. One, this is a country where when people come from other countries, they're encouraged to give up their language. So the idea that there's only one way to speak is part of it. And in other countries, people are very proud of the fact that they're multilinguistic, so that they're in the perspective of always listening differently. I think the other thing is that men and women have different brains. In the last 20 years, we've had, as a result of the imaging, a clear picture of men and women and the difference in their brains. And I think not enough attention is given to this, and so we assume that other people are like us, or they should be, and that they hear the way we hear or understand the way we understand, and that is certainly not true.
And that's what you refer to as brain sex,
yes.
right? That we have different brains,
we have different
men and
brains.
women. And we'll talk about that. Another question I had is, why is it that you have to wait? Let's say you have a conflict right away.
Right.
Why is it that it's advised to wait before you talk about it? I mean, we hear that all the time, but I feel like you need to deal with it right away.
Well, here's what I would tell you. First of all, once the words are out, you can never take them back. And when the words come up in that heat energy, they're going to be a little bit raw. And I think what we want people to do, I tell my clients, either write it down quickly to get it out of you so that you have the ability to read it back to yourself and say, do I really want to say that? Or I have 2 or 3 ranting friends, and I'll call them up and say, I need to have the 2-minute rant, or do you have a time for that? And then I rant and rave and say everything I'd like to say, and I go, whew, I feel better now. And then I start to think about what are the 3 points that I really want to convey to them.
Okay.
So it's about synthesizing it.
Short and simple.
Short and simple. Okay. Not always short and sweet, but short and simple.
If you have no reason to trust the other person, you've tried communicating with them before, it didn't work out, you don't trust them, how do you communicate effectively?
You don't. Because if the other person is not somebody that hears you in such a way that honors your truth, there's no way communication is going to take place. You're just essentially giving them energy. And years ago when I used to teach a lot, I used to have my students say this. I'd say, when you meet somebody that's really difficult and narcissistic and impossible to deal with, students, what do? And they go, we leave. So oftentimes you just have to leave those relationships because communication is impossible. You know, the kind of the joke is that the narcissistic character disordered individual lives in a glass spacesuit, invisible to us, unknown to them, and they're unable to listen or hear us. So when you run across these people, and we do, it's just part of the nature of reality, you have to realize you try it well, and if you're not heard, one of the defenses of these people is what we call learned ignorance. No matter what you say, they say, I don't understand and I don't remember. So anytime you hear somebody say, oh, I don't remember or I don't understand, a little alarm needs to go on that says, maybe this is somebody I need to not talk so much to.
Right, but let's say you work with somebody like that.
Well,
and you have to produce things.
Keep it simple, and very little inner truth should come out.
Okay. This is something that happens to me very often, which is I tell someone something, not once, not twice, 3, 5 times, and they don't get it. Okay. I'm doing something wrong, right?
No, not necessarily. We understand based upon our own experience and the images that language conveys for us. And that's why one of the things that I recommend is that we speak in analogy or stories, because those access symbols for people.
Interesting.
And if we're just using language that comes out of the linear part of the brain, we're often not going to get a person's felt energy. If we tell a story or if we use the symbolic language, which is usually a little more vivid, rich, oftentimes the other person is going to feel the understanding.
Right.
Because sometimes language is just not enough. That's why we go to the movies. That's why we like art. That's why we like music. They convey understanding in nonverbal ways.
Interesting. List of things you should not do to communicate effectively.
The first is to say to someone, I've got something to tell you, and have your finger out there. Okay, the minute you see the finger, it's all over with. To communicate in a loud voice, particularly if you're speaking with a male. One of the things the studies came up with is that males do not hear as well as females, and so when you elevate the voice, their distortion mechanism makes them think you're angry. And often women get really irate and they're very loud, and this is not going to work. So I always have women, when they're upset, write these things down and give them to men because it works out better. You know, thank God for email and faxes and things like that, where you can get non-verbal communication.
Let's talk about the differences between men and women. How do we communicate differently, and why? I know you said we have different brains.
We have different brains. Basically, the feelings function shows up in the brains of females in both hemispheres with a strong connection through the corpus callosum, which is that kind of midline in the brain. Mm-hmm. And a male has his speech in one hemisphere and his feeling in another without so much connection. And so women speak in circles and stories and symbols and feeling language at great length. Men get lost and bored and irritated because they do not know what we're talking about. So, you know, men like short, sweet, to the point, straight, brief. They get it.
Right.
And when women are upset, that is the last thing that's going to happen.
We're going to talk in circles.
Long, circular stories and feeling.
Right.
And, you know, a man wants facts and remedies. A woman wants feeling and understanding. It's not the same.
They want solutions.
That's right. Men want solutions. A woman wants to be understood. So what I tell my male clients, just say to her, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Is there anything I can do to help?
Right.
And that's really all the woman wants to hear, that she's heard, she's understood, and cared for.
Okay.
Whereas a man just wants to know, okay, what's the bottom line and what can we do?
What do you think is the biggest challenge for men and women? What turns men completely off and what turns women off?
Well, I think what turns men off is being blamed, because when men come into my office, the number one thing that men tell me is, I don't get acknowledged enough. And in graduate school, one of the behavioral rules is you stroke the behavior you want to see repeated. So if somebody does something you like, you acknowledge them for it. And men need more acknowledgement. They're taken for granted a lot. There's just assumptions. They're men. They're going to do these things. But they like to have some acknowledgement. So, you know, when they're unacknowledged and criticized, they go crazy.
Or nagged.
Nagged.
They hate to be nagged.
Yeah.
What about women?
I think what women hate is not to be looked at when they're talked to. Women come in and talk to me about how they're starting to talk to the man and he's clicking the TV or he's picking up the newspaper, and they just get so irate because they don't feel like they're making the connection. So a woman wants you to sit quietly, still, and perhaps hold her or talk with her by touching her. It's called anchoring. And then she feels like she's being heard.
So touching is very important.
Touching is very important for women.
Is it harder to teach a woman or a man to communicate, do you think?
Well, in my experience, men can learn more about a woman's communication needs easier than a woman can, because it's easier for a man to rev up a little bit. It's harder for a woman to rev down. We just have so much language. We've got thinking and feeling in both hemispheres and language in both hemispheres, and we're just like, you know, machinery made to talk. That's why if you go to a women's group, it's like, my goodness, it's like birds chirping. You don't really hear that in men's groups.
Right, right.
And men don't talk with the same kind of depth of feeling that we do. You know, they say in the brain sex books, they say that men read maps, women read character. And the biggest problem that I see is that a woman picks up something subliminally that's bothering a man and says, what's going on? What's bothering you? And he goes, nothing. And then they have a battle, because really, he didn't know anything's going on.
He's not aware
He's
of
not
it.
aware
He's not in touch
of
with
it.
his feelings.
It's not that he's not in touch with his feelings. He just hadn't gotten the message yet.
Okay.
And she picks it up kind of like the carrier pigeon before it got delivered to him. She like intercepts his communication, and then she goes on a real strong attack about it, and then they have a fight about something else. It's called a script fight, and it releases the tension, but it doesn't really address the problem.
So what should she do?
She should know that if she's picking something up and she says, dear, is something bothering you? And he says no, she needs to say, I accept that answer, but here's what I observe or feel.
Okay.
And make it about her observation and her feelings
okay,
rather than a fact. And then what happens to women is they say, oh, well, I can't trust him because he doesn't tell the truth. What truth? He doesn't know. So that kind of helps with the differences if you realize how you're going to have to approach it with him.
What's the first thing you need to ask a new man that you start to date to get to know him better, to start a relationship?
Yeah. Okay, this is not starting a relationship. You know, in nature, males audition, females choose. This is something that's kind of gone by the wayside in the last 40 years in our culture. Many of us think it should be brought back. So if a woman is auditioning a man, my opinion is the first question she should ask him is, tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you and how you got over it. Trust me, if nothing ever happened, he has not developed his deeper feelings. If he never got over it, he's still healing.
Okay.
The second thing she should ask him is, what kind of activities do you do with your long-held friendships? If he doesn't have friendships, then his feeling function and his attachment energy is somewhat diminished.
Nan, let's say you've been married a long time.
Right.
And you have communication problems. You never talk to your spouse, so he doesn't talk to you, you don't talk to him. Can that be fixed? I mean...
Oh, sure. And, you know, we have great books about it, and it usually takes a professional at least for maybe 3 months to meet with you to kind of interpret and work out the issues from the past. One of the things I have my couples do, because many of them have great grievances against each other, and so we could go who's right and who's wrong. What I prefer to have them do is write down everything they're mad at in their spouse. Take a week to do it. Take 2 weeks to do it. And then they go outside and sit down and read each of these lists to each other, burn them, and agree never to discuss this again. Because it's past.
Get over it.
Get over it. You'd have to start over. And, you know, unfortunately, people are still arguing about something that happened in 1950. One person remembers, the other person's forgotten. They need to both forget.
Get over it.
Get over it.
raising children to communicate effectively, especially teenagers who tend to just kind of close down?
Oh, they communicate, but not to you.
Why is that?
Because they're trying to go through the second stage of narcissism, in which they establish their autonomy and their sense of self. And they don't want to feel subordinate to a parent. They want to feel equal to. It's the arrogance of entitlement of teenage years. So I think the key is, what I always tell my parents is that if you will establish the habit when children are little of 3 10-minute communications. In the morning when they first get up, you always say, what are you looking forward to in your day, and did you sleep well, and did you have a dream? Then after school, you say to your child, and even if you're not there, you can call them, how was your day, what was your biggest challenge, and what was your greatest achievement? And then before bed, you can say, what do you want to dream about, what problems do you want to resolve, how do you want your life to be better? You establish the communication habit. In my experience, because my children are now, 40, 39, and 32. They talk to me all through puberty, sometimes more than I wanted, but they kept talking. So the point is, you have to establish this with consistency and really brevity.
Okay. Neuro-linguistic programming.
Which is, of course, the great product of the genius of Milton Erickson.
What does it mean?
It means that by using language in a particular way, you can access the inside of a person's processing system. People are primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. The visual person uses words like, I see what you're talking about, and so you have to use visual language to access them. The auditory person always uses words like, I really hear what you're talking about, so you use auditory words and auditory cues, and you change the pace of your language and the loud and soft of your language to get their attention. Kinesthetic people sense it through other channels, through their skin, through their intuition, and those are people that you always want to anchor by touching,
right,
if it's
right.
appropriate.
Right.
Because what you know is that the information gets in by one of those 3 channels. And NLP was designed as a result of the great pioneering work of Milton Erickson, and 2 of his students and researchers, Bandler and Granville, went and looked at what Erickson did naturally and created a communication system out of it.
What did he do for a living?
Milton Erickson, he
Yeah.
was the great psychiatrist
Okay.
who developed the ability to speak with schizophrenics in the 30s and flip them out of their trance with something he called word salad. He paced their language and they flipped back into normal conversation. He was just born a psychiatrist with hypnosis capability beyond anything any of the rest of us have.
When it comes to communication skills, what do you think is the social custom today?
The social conformity norm in our culture of let's don't offend anybody, let's be liked, let's don't hurt anybody's feelings causes people not to communicate but just to report and to interview. So there's no really quality of connection between people.
How do you know you're living smart?
When I'm sleeping well, when I'm waking up happy, when I'm dreaming, when I know that people are more important than stuff, and I look forward to a new day.
That's wonderful. One last question about children. How do we teach our children to listen actively?
By doing it. Active listening is about reflecting back what you've heard. Your child comes in and says, I'm really mad at Johnny. Many of our parents used to say, well, you must have done something, or, well, Johnny's a bad guy. Instead, you need to say, tell me more about that. It sounds like you're really feeling frustrated. And then the child can reflect the feelings of what he experienced, and once he says them out loud, he begins to deal with them better. So it's important to reflect back what the child says.
Is that sort of the concept of mirroring? We hear
It's
that
mirroring,
that's mirroring.
and it's based upon Carl Rogers, who developed the Rogerian concept that if we mirror back to people and they feel heard, they work things through because then they're not struggling to be heard. And I think it's the basis of nonviolent communication. I think it's the basis of good parenting. I think it's the basis of good communication. If we felt heard and to some extent understood, not necessarily accepted. That's why people can agree to disagree politely if they're using good communication. And that's certainly true between men and women and between parents and children. We don't always agree with our children, but if we can understand where they're coming from and they can feel that we do, then there's a bond between us.
All right. Nan Linke, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us. And thank you for joining us. For more information on communication as a power tool, you can reach Nan at 713-520-1551 and check her website at nanhalllinke.com. You can also check the Center for Nonviolent Communication website at cnvc.org. Please remember to visit houstonpbs.org/livingsmart for a complete resource list, and feel free to share your own experience on communication skills. Call us with your comments at 713-743-8513 or email livingsmart@houstonpbs.org. I'm Patricia Gross. That's our show for today. Don't miss our next episode on innovation and creativity with Dr. Raul Cuero. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to live smart. Have a great week.